In this video, I will talk about a book by Seth Rogen. I will return to Westeros and search for the meaning of life. So stay tuned. Hello friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If it's your first time here, my name is Nicholas and my goal for this year was to read 100 books. In this series of videos, I wanted to give a brief summary and overview over each and every one of them, as well as give my own personal opinion and rating in the end. So without further ado, let's continue the series with book number 21. Exciting Times by Naoise Dolan. Exciting Times is the debut novel of Irish author Naoise Dolan and received very mixed reviews upon publication earlier last year. Critics loved the razor-sharp commentary, describing the book as an intelligent and compelling read and compared the author's wit to the likes of Sally Rooney. Online reviewers, on the other hand, blamed it for being pretentious, racist, sexist, having unlikable main characters, no story and no satisfying conclusion. So I wanted to see where I stand in this heated debate. The book is written from the perspective of Ava, a 22-year-old Irish expat who recently moved to Hong Kong in order to teach English as a second language. She befriends British banker Julian, who lives a lavish lifestyle way beyond what Ava can afford. Ignoring her feminist leanings and her better instincts, she moves in with Julian and eventually engages in a sexual relationship with him. One day, Julian's job takes him back to London, leaving Ava behind. In the midst of her emotional confusion of what they are, a girl named Edith enters her life, and Ava all of a sudden has to juggle two potential lovers. What sounds like a young adult novel at first is much more of a social commentary than what the plot alludes to. I personally really liked Exciting Times and will therefore give it 4 stars. It feels a bit unpolished in places, and the story could have done with a few more plot twists, but where the novel really shines is in its social commentary, especially that of millennial culture. The author's writing can be sharp as a blade sometimes. She's cutting through the social economical bullshit of our times like it's butter. And for this being not a non-fiction book, I highlighted a surprising amount of passages because Naoise Dolan can dismantle a whole society with one sentence. I see why reviewers didn't like Ava. She is written to be unlikable in a way. I see why they think this novel is racist and sexist. But I also think that the author's message was just not elegantly crafted, and therefore maybe not as clearly conveyed as it could have been. I believe her goal was not to be defaming of any group of people, but point towards the sometimes subtle form that racism and sexism can take in our society. Surely the novel could have been better crafted to make this point clearer to the reader, but I think for anyone who gets the author's intentions, you can still have an exciting time with Exciting Times. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Something that you will hear me often say in these videos is that the book I'm about to present has been featured in some sort of top 10 list, like top 10 non-fiction books to read in your lifetime. Man's Search for Meaning is very often amongst these most recommended books, as it shines a light on the meaning of life and how humans can cope with existential threat. It is written by Viktor Frankl, an Austrian neurologist and psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust and thereafter formed a school of psychotherapy called logotherapy. It focuses on letting patients see their meaning, purpose in the most dreadful of times. As according to Frankl's observations, once humans stop seeing purpose in their being, as dreadful as it might be, they quickly stop holding onto their life and usually die shortly after. This book is split into 2 parts. In the first half, Frankl describes his everyday life in the concentration camps in vivid and horrifying detail. His retelling has such gravity it can therefore be really depressing at times. But he also manages to see light in every shadow and to not lose hope. So between all these grim and chilling reports of the cruelties done to the prisoners, the reader makes the same observations as Frankl. It were those prisoners who didn't lose hope and meaning that coped best with the atrocious circumstances and eventually made it out alive if luck was on their side. The second part then is a form of dissertation about logotherapy, almost like a Sigmund Freud-esque long-winded essay about his theories and findings. From a scientific point of view, there are for sure interesting takeaways to get from this part, especially if you have an interest in psychotherapy. But this whole segment is also fairly dry and feels like a completely different book. It delivers an important message though, nevertheless. Finding someone you love and something you love is the secret to seeing a meaning in life. I will rate this book with 4 stars. The first half is as vivid as a retelling can be, but giving a subject not for the faint of heart. The second half then loses all of this momentum and has to be read with the right expectations going in. But from how it forces us to remember the atrocities of the Holocaust up to the message and conclusions it tries to convey, Man's Search for Meaning is an important book in many ways that at one point or another should be read. Yearbook by Seth Rogen. Who would have thought that Seth Rogen would ever release a book that's also actually pretty brilliant? I was always somewhat of a fan of his work, especially in combination with James Franco. At least I was before all the allegations against Franco came to light. But never thought that his humor and character would translate so well into written format. On top of my personal fandom, this book also got some surprisingly stellar reviews online, so I definitely wanted to give it a try. Yearbook is a collection of 22 essays in which Rogen remembers some funny and thought-provoking anecdotes from his life. From the time he took drugs in high school, when to get lost in the woods at Jewish summer camp, or Kanye West awkwardly rapped for him in his tour bus. He gives insights into how his persiflage of North Korea, the interview, led to an international diplomatic crisis, and how Frankl and him came to make fun of Kanye West's famous Bound 2 video. It's a hilarious and interesting collection of short stories that made me binge read through it in 2 days. As you can tell, I personally absolutely love this book, but that comes from a guy who always really liked Seth Rogen and thinks that This Is the End is a comedic masterpiece. Arguably, this is a 5-star book for fans of Rogen and 3 stars for everyone else, so I will land right in the middle and rate it with 4 stars. You can tell that he started to do stand-up comedy by the age of 13, as his capabilities of telling a good story and his smooth deliveries are spot on. But I think they lack the impact if you have little prior knowledge of him or his movies. On a side note, Yearbook lends itself really well to be listened to as an audiobook, as it is read by the man, the myth, the legend himself. Anything You Want by Derek Sivers. Yet another modern classic of non-fiction literature. Anything You Want is often amongst the most recommended books of big productivity YouTubers like Ali Abdaal or self-made entrepreneurs such as Tim Ferriss. The author Derek Sivers rose to fame in the early 2000s with a website called CD Baby, at which he offered a platform for independent musicians and bands to sell their CDs online. Mind you, that was in the years before music streaming was a thing, or juggernauts such as iTunes took over the market. Selling music online was still in its infancy, and so CD Baby quickly rose to fame. In the span of 10 years, the website grew from 0 employees and almost no revenue to 85 employees and $4 million in revenue per month up until Sivers sold the project in 2008. In Anything You Want, he lays out 40 of his learnings that he made along the way and explains his reasoning behind them. Without knowing the guy personally, this book gets across Sivers' character really well, I think. He seems approachable and fair, straight to the point, and equipped with a just-do-it mentality. He's the kind of guy who just goes for it and figures out the correct proceedings later on. Someone who would rather ask for forgiveness than for permission, a trait that seemingly many entrepreneurs have in common. His 40 life lessons are a clear reflection of that, and his nice guy mentality definitely helped him to build a successful business, one which puts its customers first and tries not to sell its soul to big corporations. Being so customer first and not greedy leads to some generally good takeaways in his book, especially for freelancers who are just starting out. At times though, his casual approach to business is a clear product of survivorship bias in my mind, as he delivers what feels like 2 types of lessons. The advice that's rationally proven to work, and the advice that just happened to work for him or which he got away with. Like at one point in the book, he describes having a solid legal groundwork as a business, such as having terms and conditions, as sales tactics that are just designed to scare you and that you will totally get away without having them. I agree that not every new freelancer needs a whole legal team behind them, but it was this amongst a few other points where Sivers lost some of his credit for me. Overall, this book is a solid 3.5 stars in my mind, as between all the really good advice and a little bad, he still delivers an approachable, quick read that I could finish within 2 hours, and therefore it doesn't hurt if you pick it up. I think there are takeaways in here that are worth remembering, but the biggest one I got from it was this line. If you're not saying hell yeah about something, say no. And I can fully say hell yeah to that. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms by George R.R. Martin. Does any one of you remember Game of Thrones? It was a huge show a few years ago that feels like it got completely forgotten due to botched final season and little follow-up input ever since. For the first few seasons, it was an absolutely well-crafted masterpiece of cinematic television, based on a book series called A Song of Ice and Fire by author George R.R. Martin. As in a few weeks' time then, House of Dragon, an official spin-off series who will launch on HBO, I wanted to dive back into the world of Westeros. I chose not to go for the main novels though, as these are being kept on my reading list up until Winds of Winter is finally getting a release date. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms then is a collection of 3 novellas surrounding the 2 main protagonists, Dunk and Egg. It's yet another spin-off of the main series, as it indeed does take place in Westeros, but roughly 90 years before the events of Game of Thrones. A lot of places and characters will sound and feel familiar, which ultimately makes up a lot of the charm and appeal of this collection. Dunk is a so-called hedge knight, a kind of mercenary who roams the lands of Westeros after his years of service under Sir Arlan of Pennytree come to an abrupt end. Sir Arlan died, hence why it ended abruptly. In a local inn, he runs into a young, bald stable boy who therefore calls himself Egg, and he decides to make Egg his squire. Together, they make for a charismatic duo, and we follow them through Westeros in all 3 separate novellas: The Hedge Knight, The Sworn Sword, and The Mystery Knight. These are all self-contained stories and lay the groundwork for some of the characters we will later see and hear from in A Game of Thrones. I really enjoyed my time back in Westeros, so A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms gets 4.5 stars from me. George R.R. Martin has a brilliantly fluid writing style. He's capable of making the sceneries really come alive and is a master at creating interesting characters. Unfortunately though, these books are plagued by the same overflow of characters that made A Game of Thrones hard to understand at times. There are so many names and relationships to remember that without a wiki at my side, I probably would have missed out on some of the impacts of the plot twists later on. That being said, it was a joy to read nevertheless, especially for fans of the series who are hungry for more input and want to bridge the time until Winds of Winter eventually, maybe ever, comes out. Earlier last year, it was also announced that HBO is producing a TV series based on the Dunk and Egg books, so now might be a really good time to jump back into this world once again. So these were another 5 out of 100 books for this year. If you enjoyed this content, please leave me a like. And if you fancy buying any of these books now, like A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, check out the links in my description below. And for more book reviews, check out this video right here. Thank you and see you next time. Ciao.